Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Dr. Paul.
Good. I guess everything's going to be okay. We have a Happy New Year. We erase all the past sins and problems of the world. So what do? We're going to start off by trying to figure out who's telling the truth.
Okay.
And I think we've gotten to a point now where most Americans don't believe the government, which I consider pretty healthy.
Yeah.
But there's a big stink going on. And of course, we were on the receiving end of the posts not too many weeks ago that we were part of the Russian conspiracy because we want to be fair and balanced and talk about facts. They say, "Oh, you're nothing. You're just working for the Russians." Of course, they've sort of dropped on that because it was such a fake. It was such malarkey going on. But it doesn't stop. You'd think they'd get embarrassed once in a while and say, "Well, why do we keep doing this?" And the culprit again is the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And the big thing is not only all this hacking that they're going to blame on Russia or trying to, but it's also dealing with this thing up in Vermont that there was conspiracy and the Russians were hacking, and turns out not to be true at all. So what's going on here in Vermont? Should we be worried, or do we think that we have heard a little bit about fake news once again?
Isn't it how ironic that the Washington Post wants to be the organ that judges the fake news of everyone else when they're one of the prime purveyors of it? But, once again, they have egg on their face, worse than egg, whatever's worse than egg on your face, they have on their face. And they breathlessly reported on Friday night, the Russians have hacked our energy grid, as if we're just waiting for them to turn off the light and we'll be, thrust into darkness. Well, it turns out, and this is a great article in Forbes that we both looked at, they went back and traced the timeline of the article that the Washington Post came out with. And they essentially said, we have the first headline that they came out with, this breathless reporting, Russian operation hacked a Vermont utility, showing the risk to the U.S. electrical grid, officials say. And you'll see underneath it there's an editor's note because they had to change it. And then they had to come back a day later with, if we can have the second one, a day later they had to come out with the second headline, and it's something that's slightly different than that. They didn't do it, sorry. But here's what they did, though. The Post ran with the story, and Forbes went back and looked at the timestamps. They ran with the story before they even called the Burlington utility and asked them if they'd been hacked. They ran with it, and then they lied and said they didn't. So the fact checkers are the ones themselves that did not check the facts at all.
What's this old-fashioned rule when their newspapers were, a little bit more responsible? They were supposed to have two people verify the same facts. Now they have zero.
Zero.
And then they call it news. And, really what's disappointing, it works for their cause. Even though most Americans now don't believe their government, the political system, the partisans believe what they want to believe. So when they put this out that, this fake news, and they want to say that the Republicans are bad people and they're part of the hacking and they're part of a Russian conspiracy, they find out that like 70 or 80% of the Democrats believe them and the 60 or 70% of the Republicans don't believe them. So it becomes a partisan thing. You'd think they'd get tired of this, and look elsewhere. But, the mainstream media and the newspapers and the TV, they still have a lot of political clout that we were hoping that the internet would correct. But once again, the internet sometimes isn't very helpful either. So it just makes our job terribly hard, to find out where truth is and where the fiction is and where the fake news is. And so that is a challenge. I imagine that'll be one of the main challenges, as it has been in the past. That'll be a challenge for us this year to try to let people know. But the rule I think we ought to think about following is don't believe any of them. Don't call them a liar, but just say when it breaks news, just hold back, and wait a minute and not be partisan and hysterical and the end of the world's coming, they're going to close down the grid. this sort of thing, you'd think people would back off, but they're demagogues is what they are, and they make use of this, and as a political use, because they're individuals. Not being any super fan of Donald Trump, their goal is to mainly destroy him before he gets started. And on the one issue that we like to encourage him is on the Russian thing, and all this fake news about him. So, and who knows what's going to come up in the next day or two. He may come up with some really good facts. And it would be nice if he could really put these guys down who are getting away with too much fiction.
As you say, they're not discouraged. And I think because it has enormous propaganda value, even if it's later debunked, because the Post came out with the story on Friday night, and it shot like a rocket. Reuters picked it up. The New York Times picked it up. It went everywhere. The Russians hacked our grid. And so then a couple of days later, when they have to do a retraction, still the effect is in people's minds. And this is the same kind of case that they built, remember, in the run-up to the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein has drones over our cities ready to bomb us. And the slight correction later, you already establish in people's minds this certain series of facts, even if they're fakes.
It gets to the point where both sides tend to do silly things because it's a political battle going on in competition. And can we win a point here or there? Of course, I consider this very dangerous. But this whole thing of blaming the Russians, and Obama didn't want to do too much, and then he got to be embarrassed because he should have known what was going on because they told him there was a possibility of this. So he got pressured in. Well, I got to put sanctions on the Russians. So he gets throws out 35 so-called diplomats, spies, and horrible people. So he throws them out as if this is really cracking down on them. And I thought Putin came across pretty shrewd and put it in the proper perspective. He sort of laughed at him. He says, "Well, I'm not going to play this game of kitchen cabinet diplomacy." And he says, "I'm not going to do this." He says, "Besides, I'm going to invite the children of the United States embassies and the children to our New Year's Eve party." So that to me is sort of where it was. It wasn't that serious, but I mean, there's some people in this country that say, no matter what, if they interfered, this is justification because this is World War III coming, if they actually interfered in that election. And yet there's no proof of that. There's hints and innuendos and all this. But, I'm back to the one thing of trying to figure out where we stand, what our responsibilities are, what our moral obligations are. And, it is so far removed from what we expect from other people. I mean, we should be able to do something for us. But we've quoted this statistic before, and that is in a 54-year period up until the year 2000, so that was after World War II, we interfered in the elections of 81 countries, and it's known. And then also, during that period of time, significant assassinations of 50 that were directed by our CIA that they document. Some they brag about. I mean, this is the whole thing. I mean, do you think they're embarrassed by disrupting Iraq? Oh no, go over there and kill a few, and look at where Iraq is. So that's no problem. And if you look at our long-term history, we literally used troops in South America and Central America in this Latin American period. We did it hundreds of times. And then all of a sudden, well, maybe somebody did this, and we have to really, really get ready because this is serious business. Now, what is going to be the response for some people saying, oh, all they want to do is bash America. No, I want us to be the right kind of people so we can be emulated and respected and maybe share some good values. But if we do this and jump all over them and get willing to start a fight. I mean, right now we're participating in tremendous military buildup in Eastern Europe.
That's true, yes.
So,
it was funny, remember there was a Time magazine cover from 1996, and there was a picture of a drawing of Boris Yeltsin on the cover, and the title was, "Yanks to the Rescue. How Americans Helped Re-elect Boris Yeltsin. Here it is out on the front page of Time, how we hacked their election and rigged their election in favor of him. That's okay. You know.
I wanted to get your opinion about a couple experts. From reading this, it sounds like there's a lot of expertise on the side of saying, don't jump the gun, the thing that you were just talking about, the newspapers jump the guns. But some have come out. There's Bill Binney, I believe. Now, he's come out, and he was rather blunt on this. He said, and he helped set up NSA's global surveillance system. He says it's all BS.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy's a credible guy.
Oh, yeah, he's a genius, mathematical genius. Matter of fact, one of the characters in the Snowden movie was based on him.
Yeah. So, and then there's another one, John McAfee. I don't know. He's listed as somebody that understands computers.
He's made gazillions of dollars on computer security, so he should know too.
And he was rather blunt too. He says, I can guarantee you, it was not the Russians. And like it's been said, that if anybody's smart enough to crack the computers of the DNC, or smart enough to cover up their trail. I mean, sometimes when the trails become overly apparent, sometimes it's sort of the false flag thing, blame somebody else for it, and pretend it's somebody that didn't really do it. But, obviously it's going to be a battle between the experts. One expert will say this is what's happened, but then you need somebody else. And then you have to be concerned about whether or not they're telling us the truth either.
Yeah, that's true. And looking at the timeline, we're picking on the Post, and I think rightly so. But if we can just look at a timeline really quick. You mentioned earlier on the November 29th story in the Washington Post. Exposed all of these alternative independent media sources as secret agents of the Kremlin. The Drudge Report, Consortium News, Lou Rockwell, the Ron Paul Institute.
And yes, the Liberty Report. They're always after us.
Yeah, and so this is what they did at first. That was before the election. Established that just after the election, when the disputing over the Russian hacking, established that these are all fake news. And then the Homeland Security Report comes out shortly thereafter, later in December. Just about a week or so ago, I guess. And this report supposedly proves Russian involvement in hacking. But if you read the Homeland Security Report, it proves nothing of the sort. It's mostly a guideline for agencies on how to prevent malware from being inserted into the computers. And this was not a smoking gun whatsoever. But based on that pretty shoddy report by the Homeland Security, then Obama, as you say, expelled 35 Russians, said they were spies. As Bob Wenzel wrote, they even kicked out the chef in the embassy in San Francisco, the consulate in San Francisco. So they're going hungry. They're eating TV dinners. And then after that, based on the DHS, Homeland Security, that's when the Vermont story came. So the Washington Post builds on all of these things. It comes out with a story saying the malware that the Homeland Security came out with and warned us about, here it is in our electrical grid. We all better be terrified.
Right. We went through this under different circumstances, sorting out truth and fiction, leading up to the Iraq War. You went over all this material with me, and we studied this thing, and we had some people that we thought we could trust, either in or former members of the CIA, trying to tell us the truth about weapons of mass destruction, and we looked at that. And back then, we had some members of Congress that would go to the top secret briefings. And the top secret briefings would assure them and show them all this proof, even to the point of Powell, going to the United Nations. Yeah. I mean, this was all fake news. And Powell, obviously, I think, was pretty nervous about the whole thing. But some members have come up afterwards and they said, well, how do you know that for sure? I said, well, there was information out there. And they said, yeah, but we went to the briefings. Well, I didn't go to the briefings because I've had experience with the briefings. And I don't think they were top secret briefings. They were political grandstanding to try to, convert to the congressman to support the position and scare them. They did that after the financial crisis too, to get them to support all this money and things, get them in it and really scare them into it. But I became skeptical of that whole system of surveillance a long time ago, and that occurred way back, probably in the 70s. I met an individual, a reputable individual, a conservative constitutionalist who was in the FBI that helped study individuals that were going to be put in the CIA. And he told me that everybody he picked, he advised, don't use them. And he had another list. These people look reputable and decent and honest. And they took all the irreputable people and started the CIA. And that was at the beginning. And so he was, and of course, philosophically, he was positively opposed, this gentleman, to, secret organizations like the CIA, because they become a government unto themselves. So he says, in a republic, you do not have this type of surveillance. And what do we have? Intelligence agency of 17, and of course Truman thought the reason why he wanted the CIA was to try to coordinate this stuff, not to have more surveillance, not to create a cloak and dagger group of people going around, and he was upset about that. It was just to bring this together to try to help a president sort this all out, but it's more complicated than ever before. The only thing that's going to solve this is that we change our foreign policy, is what I say, and we'll ignore most of this stuff, and they still won't touch us because we'll be much stronger. Right now, we're weaker because of our foreign policy. We're more vulnerable financially and militarily, and the threat of people wanting to blow up Americans and kill Americans. So I think it would be so much better for the American people to reassess the foreign policy of this country.
Exactly. You said something very important a few minutes ago that I really would like to underscore. All of this whole view about Russian hacking the elections was based on some secret CIA briefings. And you sort of offered just now really a glimpse into what it's like to be a congressman, both yourself but especially your colleagues, and to go to some of these briefings. And I know the ones you're talking about, and they did say, this is a snow job. They're not telling us the real facts. So we know that in these briefings, politics plays a huge role, as it did in the Iraq War. Americans should consider that when they're considering the story about the hacking now.
Yeah, and I think people should approach these issues being very skeptical, more than ever, and try to sort out the partisanship. They're skeptical and they don't trust their government, but if their party leaders tell them that we need to do this because we can really get to the opposition, you have to be skeptical. You have to be really nonpartisan. You have to have a real desire to find out what the truth is. Instead of no evidence, try to get it verified by more than one person. It was not like we had one individual that came to our office and talked to us about their skepticism of what kind of threat Saddam Hussein presented and what could happen. And so that doesn't mean anybody has a monopoly on the truth. It means that some of us have an obligation to do our very best to seek the truth and pass that on to people who are looking for more information. But there would be less compulsion to answer every little thing going on in the world. I mean, look how many battles are going on internally in all the countries, and we're always getting involved. That's why we were involved in 81 elections. And what was that famous statement that Hillary said? Oh, we ought to have an election in Israel or in Palestine, but we better be darn. I don't want you to do it, but we better be darn sure we know who we're going to elect. Yeah. I mean, that's, and then they have the gall to come up and say, well, maybe this and maybe that. I think we should go to war with Russia and we got to put on sanctions, and they break up. All these just antagonizing people unnecessarily, and I keep using the episode. Well, at least Kennedy talked to Khrushchev when we were on the verge of nuking each other. I mean, that's what they should do. But here we had all these advancements on two major governments coming together. The Soviet system collapses, and we started to trade, and now we have this unwinding now. And sometimes it just bewilders me. What really motivates these people? I mean, where are the neocons coming from? What do they think they're doing? They don't seem to have our interests at heart.
Back to the Post story in the end, and this is a Forbes sort of summation paragraph, which is so important. After they exposed the fact that the Post never bothered to check the facts, never bothered to call a utility company. This is sort of a paraphrasing of what Forbes said, but it's so important thinking about the mainstream media. It also tells us the Post ran its story based solely and exclusively on the word of U.S. government sources. The Post ran the story exclusively based on the word of government sources with no external fact-checking. What does that say about the mainstream media? They get it from the government, that's all they need.
Well, I'll tell you what the people should say, and that is don't trust the Main Street media. Occasionally you might get some truth from the Main Street media, but most of the time it's political nonsense that's come from it. You have Republican stations and Democrat stations and newspapers that aren't controlled. You have an internet, which has done pretty well, but it's being challenged as well. And we find out that some of the social networks have a lot of influence, and they're closely related to government. So all we can do is set our standards high and say that we seek truth, and the best thing to do is be less involved in these very, very complicated matters in the internal affairs of other countries, especially border disputes throughout the world. Things would be much better off. But anyway, it's a important subject. You're going to hear a lot more about it. Things will change, with the new administration, and when they're going in the right direction, which means a little bit more restraint on Russia, fine and dandy. We should encourage that, a little bit more common sense. But if it's saying, well, what we have to do is go and bomb Iran, that's something different. Why can't we just follow a consistent policy of non-interventionism instead of picking and choosing and hoping for the better? But it makes people very suspicious. But nevertheless, I think that some good can come of this. I think this whole thing about fake news is good, that more and more people, are wondering about it. I had a call just the other day. A person called and said, what is all this about fake news, and how can you tell it's fake news? Well, I said, kiddingly, of course, everything is fake news until proven otherwise. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.